Thank you so much for joining us here. Good morning. And I am thrilled to be joined here today by two very distinguished practitioners, educators, and thinkers. I'm not going to go too much into the introductions. I'd much rather hear their stories. But I'm thrilled to be joined here today by Dr. Elizabeth Kish, who is, of course, the Warden and CEO of the Rhodes Trust. One of my heroes, and
is mutual.
and just an amazing thinker and visionary leader for the trust. And I'm also joined here by Dr. Danil Mikhailov, who is the executive director of Data.org, and Danil has had a very interesting career spanning technology, social impact, working in philanthropy, in education, and I'm very, very excited to kick off this conversation.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Before we begin, I wanted to comment a little bit on the video that we just saw. That video was not real. Good. Okay, so we have ample amount of AI detection here. So when we were coordinating with Kevin's office, Kevin was traveling between countries, and we had an early draft of the video, and we needed to make some edits, and we sent back the edits, and Kevin said, "I'm not free right now. I cannot do this. Can you edit the video?" And so his team and we got together, and we were trying to edit the video using some fairly easily available AI tools, it turns out. I have to confess, I could not sleep that night because I was alarmed at how easily available tools can be used to manipulate media in a way that is frankly very scary. Now, this was obviously done with his consent. We sent him the video. We asked him if he was okay with the words. He said, this looks a little strange, but I'm okay with it. And I was like, let's start a conversation off, because we are ending today with an actual robot speaking to you. Now, this is a liminal space between, a human being with an original human voice with some original human words, which were fed into a machine that, frankly, twisted his accent, made, things look a little wonky. But you can imagine a future where those things are actually kind of, corrected around. What scared me the most was that you could literally type in a bunch of words and you could have him say those words. So this brings out all kinds of really tricky and frankly scary conceptions of what it means to be a human, what it means to attribute things. And I think that's, when I was here 15 years back, I was just telling Elizabeth that the philosophers would care a little bit about technology and science. The technologists definitely do not care about philosophy. And that has changed, right? I mean, this is no longer kind of esoteric thinking or, questions that you will see at the All Souls exam. This is very real questions that is facing us in today's world. And I cannot think of to better people to help us process this moment and how we can build a future where we equip people to live in this technology-enabled world than Elizabeth and Danil. So welcome. To kind of set a little bit more context for this conversation, I was reading, I don't know, some of you might have come across a Techno-Optimist's Manifesto, which was published by Mark Andreessen, a very famous Silicon Valley investor, and he called tech ethics the enemy. And I was very struck by that description. It's kind of growingly the case that a lot of folks in technology have a kind of anti-ethics approach to particularly to AI and computing. They feel that conversations around ethics, conversations around AI safety can kind of slow down innovation. On the other hand, there are lots of people like you here who are worried about the fact that these technologies are going to pose new ethical problems. And many higher ed institutions, I'm afraid to say, don't prepare us to have these conversations today. So given this context, I'd like to talk today about how do we build ecosystems in the future that can enable ethical technologists? And I want to sort of start off with kind of motivations and your journeys in lieu of a formal bio. And Elizabeth, if I can sort of ask you about your experience in leading ethics education institutes. You've seen this. This is happened in academia before, right? Earlier, you had academics who said, ethics education had no space in academia, and you were in the thick of that sort of debate. And tell us a little bit about how that was like and how you kind of dealt with the environment back then.
Sure. No, thank you. And thanks so much for having me. And I was so excited to have all of you here. Yeah, I was one of those, I'm trained as a philosopher, and I was always one of those philosophers who cared more about ethical questions. How should we treat one another? Those fundamental questions about what kind of society are we trying to build, rather than perfectly honorable and important questions like how do we know this table is real? But I'm very much of a pragmatist about stuff like that. And so, I did as I became a professor, and then started to realize that I wasn't actually helping students ask themselves the question, how ought I to live? I was giving them lots of great critical tools for criticizing Aristotle and Kant and everything else, but not actually to ask the question about themselves, like what do I believe and how do I want to treat other people? So that's what kind of led me to be involved in things like the Keenan Institute for Ethics at Duke. And as you were saying, Abhilash, a whole lot of resistance, right? So faculty saying it's not my job. I teach literature, I teach chemistry. They immediately thought of, and I think we're seeing some of this in things like the Tech Optimists Manifesto, that raising ethical questions is Big Brother, forcing you to do something, or it's surveillance, or it's the morality police, So
Are you supposed to be the big brother here? Like,
yes,
who?
Yes.
Who's?
So I'll just very quick story. The crazy part of this was the Association for Practical and Professional Ethics National Conference, and I was leading a conversation. Should ethics teachers strive to be role models? Should we strive to be ethical role models? And I thought the answer to that was like an obvious yes. And so I put the question out there, and it was like one of the most hostile audiences I have ever, encountered in my entire life. And people they were so threatened by this notion, And so what I kept saying is, this is not about us having all the answers. It's about us caring about the questions and being authentic and honest, And I think, in a way, I feel like in the technology space, we're seeing some of that. This Tech Optimist Manifesto, if you've not read it, Abhilash sent us the link. Whoa! I would love to teach this in a class. It is so out there, there is no human problem that technology cannot solve, Wow.
That's verbatim from
That's
the
verbatim. That is
the,
verbatim,
yeah.
Amazing. And, so what I've tried to do, and I think tried to create space within the academy for saying we all need to be asking these questions. And so when we were working with, engineering professors and science professors at Duke and elsewhere, what was really useful was getting people to think about themselves authentically, like what do I care about? What are my values? What kind of world do I want my children and grandchildren to live in? But also, what are the ethical considerations within my own field? So actually often, now I don't know whether this would work with the Mark Andreessens, but with, for example, chemistry professors, we got them to think about if people weren't honest about their data, there would never be scientific progress. And yet, ambition, et cetera, it leads people to cook the books, right? To cook the data. So to start there, what are the ethical considerations that actually enable progress in my own field?
And you've seen this in the context of the big challenge with Francesca Gino at Harvard,
Yes.
who, basically bringing an entire field to question which could have been solved if questions around data ethics, what is puzzling, and we can maybe talk about it a little later, is that these conversations have existed about data ethics for about 20 years now.
Yes.
It's not like these conversations haven't existed. It hasn't quite seeped into practice, and maybe we can talk a little bit about like what it really takes to practice those things, whether it's in academia or in the nonprofit sector. And I want to get to Danil for that, because you are a practitioner. You've had a very interesting career working at the Wellcome Trust and now at data.org, but also like living with many different cultures. You grew up in the USSR, you lived in China for a while. So tell us a little bit about how your thinking about moral education has changed, or ethics education has changed.
Sure. No, thank you, and thanks for having me. It's such a wonderful venue and forum for discussion. So I'll tell you a little bit about my kind of background to place it. So I was born, as you say, in the USSR. USSR was very, very focused on STEM education. So my schooling was maths, physics, maths, chemistry, maths, etc. Which is great. So I came to the UK, continued that, higher maths, etc. Went to computer science in my first degree. But somewhere in the mid-90s, I was at university, I felt the lacking of the human. Like, okay, great, all these numbers, excellent. Where is the culture, the society? Where is the human in this? So then when I graduated from my computer science degree, I did a master's in something completely different. So I went to SOAS, School of Oriental African Studies in London, and I did a master's degree in cultural anthropology of China and Chinese philosophy. Like, as far removed from computer science and numbers as you could possibly get. And I loved it. I loved it because that's where I found the human again, the culture, the society. And then I spent about 10 years after that doing effectively field research in China, so traveling all in China, studying Chinese religious practices and other cultural practices as effectively an anthropologist. Gradually, this was the birth of the internet, I started to use the web and digital tools to share my research with my friends, and got then back into technology. And then having had those two experiences, the computer science and maths first, and then the social sciences and humanities, I began to see the value. I began to see how the human and technology can overlap in interesting ways. So I got back into tech, had a number of tech leadership roles, ended up as head of data at the Wellcome Trust, which is a big funder by way of life sciences, one of the biggest in the world. And I really got there the liberty, the open space to experiment. So I set up an AI labs within Wellcome Trust called Wellcome Data Labs, which was analyzing funding data at scale and developing AI tools, including generative AI, which was then barely known, so early versions of BERT and SciBERT models, to analyze the output of academic publications, funding data, policy documents, etc. Try and find connections. How do you trace like a funding decision to academic output to policy output a decade later? So that was exciting. But then I thought, okay, how do I bring the social back in? Because I had this other part of me. So I decided to experiment. And in my AI product team, I introduced a social scientist. So I got a sociologist, and I asked him to come in for 2 years and be embedded in the product team. So he was there doing the agile sprints. He was there working on GitHub and doing comments and literally speaking the language of the techs, but bringing his social science thinking into it. And he formed a great partnership with my user experience lead within the team. So they have they became a pair. Like she was on the inside of the team as a user experience lead. He was a social scientist, and they had a kind of common language being developed. So to cut a long story short, what's the learning? For 2 years of the experiment, first of all, excitement. Like all the techs saying, great, social science. They did a few kind of lunchtime lectures from the social scientists. They really enjoyed it. But as soon as the questions were asked about their work, they suddenly went, whoa, hold on a second. Now, are you saying I have to slow down? Are you saying I have to ask, are you actually questioning me? And then suddenly this adoption curve. So it went from high excitement to, whoa, resistance. It went down straight away. And maybe for a good first year, there was clashes, like cultural differences, linguistical differences. People just were speaking past each other. But then over time, we persisted. And over time, it went back up again. And suddenly, they saw the reason. Like, what people don't understand is in modeling, in creation of these AI models, technologists make decisions all the time. Where do you set the thresholds? Are you looking at false positives or false negatives? How do you do this? And they do it in isolation. But suddenly when you have a culture of asking each other and you have the social sciences thinking there, you can begin to make those decisions in light of consequences, like what would happen later on if I set a threshold in a particular way in my model. And that's where it became to be positive again. So it took over a year before it went back up again, but eventually it ended up in this positive interdisciplinary space where people actually had a shared language to discuss. And that was a great learning for me. So my current job, 3 years ago, I left Welcome. I helped set up Data.org, which is a nonprofit that helps other nonprofits, governments, academia to use AI and data. I try to apply that learning. So a lot of what we do is we fund skilling and education programs at universities in data science. So there's probably about 30 universities around the world we support, all over the world. So from the US to India to, I think, 17 African countries we're in. And those courses are interdisciplinary. So by design, the curriculum is having modules in R and Python and various technical skills, but also modules in how to work with communities and win their trust, how to care about the social consequences of decisions. And that was very much informed by my whole experience in teaching data science in a different way. We believe the next generation of young data scientists, data analysts, data engineers need to be interdisciplinary for us to deal with these problems.
So I want to pick up on this thread of trying to persuade leaders to care about sort of ethics and being embedded in technology. And we're living through this weird, interesting time where you actually have users of technology who care about ethics quite a bit and are worried about it, but leaders, including folks like Mark Andreessen, maybe even university presidents, are still maybe a little removed from that process. University presidents have probably been changed since your time back in the early 2010s. But I'm wondering, like, how do you make a case for ethics education in academia? And then I want to hear from Danil about the same.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think we need to get past this sort of toggling between, ethics doesn't matter at all, to this is all incredibly scary and we need to clamp down on it because it is bringing about a horrible dystopia, because it's in between where, first of all, technology has always been in between. Technology has always been, a tool for good and for ill, and it's always it's up to human beings and how we organize ourselves and how we regulate, how we shape, how we educate. That's always been the matter. So I think also a part of it is persuading people that, as you were suggesting earlier, we've been here before. At every stage of human development and technological development, technology itself has a kind of propulsive force, as does innovation and creativity. But we've seen plenty of examples of technology leading to really terrible consequences for human beings. We also, so many of the good things that we all benefit from are because of technology. So, trying to get it out of this space of, for the first time ever, we have to have these conversations. And I loved what you said about interdisciplinarity, because I actually think that is the key here, is to bring people together who ask questions from a variety of different lenses. So, part of the way I would say to leaders is, you just made the point. Users are concerned about this, right? Policymakers are concerned about it. We can have a thoughtful response and approach to this if we bring people together who understand technology, are sympathetic to technology, but are also approaching it from all these different disciplinary lenses, and come up with kind of consensual approaches to how can we make this better, how can we mitigate its risks, how can we strengthen its benefits. So I think that's the way I would do it. Also, I suppose part of what we always try to do at the Keenan Institute for Ethics, which I directed for 10 years at Duke, was to kind of link to core mission as well. So to say I'm not sure this would work with Mark Andreessen, but anyway, for a university president, gosh, your mission statement says that this institution is here to benefit society, So it's trying to understand your audience and to think about what is it about their core kind of mission, purpose that you can plug into and say, here's how, here's something you need to care about. One final story that I'll share from my time at Duke. We read, because when I was at the Kenan Institute for Ethics, we were part of a national survey of student cheating. In fact, we hosted the organization that was running this survey, and so Duke participated in the survey and had incredibly high rates of data fabrication by science students. So I had the great pleasure of reporting to the faculty council this data, and then also sharing it with the president, President Nan Cohan. She's one of my absolute sheroes, and I said to her, Nan, I understand that the student newspaper is about to write a piece about this, and you know that once it hits the student newspaper, it is going to hit the papers. And Nan said, well, that's okay, because it's a problem and we need to address it. So she blessed that. I mean, she couldn't have stopped the students anyway, but she kind of blessed in fact, we will get ahead of this and say, Duke is seeking to address this. We're going to make ethics training mandatory for all scientists, but also we're going to work on pedagogy for science professors. Like, how do you actually persuade students you shouldn't fabricate data because you're not learning science if you're fabricating data, And I was so proud of her for that. And that was a beautiful moment. Like, there are these moments where leaders, sort of have that, okay, what do I do? And this is just kind of a funny coda to it, is I was trying to raise money for my ethics center, right? And I went to a guy who, owned the Durham Bulls baseball team and some television stations, And I asked him to endow the directorship of the Kenan Institute for Ethics, and I thought he'd name it for himself, And he said, I want to name it for Nan Cohan, because she was so gutsy about being out there about this is an issue for Duke University and we need to take it seriously. So
being ethical pays as well.
It pays. I don't want to put too much weight on that, but it is kind of a nice story that sometimes it pays.
So, Danil, I want to put you in the spot. Like, imagine you're at dinner with Mark Andreessen. By the way, with the Optimist Manifesto, I agree with about 75% of what he's saying. It's the 25% that scares me. And so imagine that you're at dinner with Mark Andreessen, and you want to make a historical case for why ethics is important in embedding that in technology. How would you go about it?
So the first thing to say is I agree maybe with more, maybe 80, 90% of what he said. So here's, if you haven't read the article, a quick summary. Technology good, technology driver of all, everything that's good about society, free markets good, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very, it is a very optimistic and positive message about how human society can flourish. We can agree with that. The problem is in the 10% or 20%, how we define it, where he says things like, all you need is positive thinking and a cheap laptop, and you can be part of this revolution. Like, we know it's not true. Like, there are people around the world who don't have laptops. There are people around the world who might have laptops, but not allowed to use them because there might be a woman in a country where women are allowed to have a business. Like, there are a lot of issues to consider. It's not just positive thinking that overcomes everything. So that 10, 20% of his message, it just doesn't fly for me. But if I were in the room with him, I would remind him, because he isn't just an investor, he's a great innovator. He was one of the founders of Mosaic web browser, which became Netscape Navigator. So he was one of the fathers of the internet revolution. So he had his hands in creating the world we're talking about. So remind him of where he started. Like, in the early days, you were positive and creative, but you had lots of help. Like, people made bets on you. People allowed you the spaces to take risks. And that's where the social comes in. It's not just technology. For me, these things are not tech, they're socio-tech. It matters who helps you get the leg up. It matters who gives you the first funding. It matters who allows you to experiment with their data in the first place. Mm-hmm. It matters who gives you the access to your computing resources. All of those are human and social decisions which support the creation of the tech. So for me, you need to look at it in the round and see it as a socio-technical problem. So my answer to him would be, remember where you started. And remember all of those people who helped you. They were humans. They were not technology. They were part of society. So how do you create the same structures for others in the future. Don't just say, have positive thinking and you'll do it. Look at the structures that are preventing them and then try to help. Use your power to help remove those barriers. That's where I'll go. And by the way, I really agree with what you said, Elizabeth, about it's in the middle. Like, you can be too negative, you can be too positive about these things. I remember I wrote an article with a colleague of mine, Nicola Perrin, in probably 2018 or 2017 in The Guardian. We were talking about the use of health data, medical data in the NHS to drive innovation with AI. And we were trying to make the argument that there needs to be a space in the middle. You need to be careful with privacy, for example, concerns and safeguards that need to be put in place. But if you don't do this, if you don't invest, if you don't look at the great value of the data NHS holds and try to innovate, then there are opportunity costs. There are people who will be dying who otherwise would live. And Mark Andreessen makes that point in his manifesto. Opportunity costs need to be counted in the equation. Like, the things where you don't innovate and people are harmed through not innovation are part of it. And that article, I remember Nicola calling me the next morning when it came out in The Guardian. It was hugely discussed online. And the amount of comments were split about 50-50. People who were criticizing us for being too negative about technology, the tech optimists, and 50% were criticizing us, don't touch the data ever. And literally I said to Nicola, don't worry, it's 50-50, which means we hit the bullseye. It's in the middle, it's fine. So I was pretty happy with the output. So it is in the middle. We can be too negative about things. We can go too fine in preventing technology from happening and innovation from happening. The best way is, we're talking about interdisciplinarity, we need to, from the beginning, involve the communities that are going to be affected by the data in the design of the systems that we're creating. We need to involve different disciplines in the design of the systems we're creating. We need more people around the table, fundamentally, who will suddenly put up their hand and say, hold on a second, have you considered X? And because the people who are designing the systems are too narrow, fundamentally, to use a stereotype, a white male in their 20s, somewhere in San
Silicon
Francisco,
Valley.
in Silicon Valley, exactly, or maybe in the east coast of China, we need to broaden the people who do it. The wider, the more diverse the groups of people in the room when we're designing the systems, the more the likely they are to ask the question and say, hold on, have you considered X? And then we'll be designing better systems.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. We have about 5 minutes, or maybe we are way past. I don't know what the negative sign is.
5 minutes.
We have 5 over, so that's the negative sign there. Okay. All right. I'll choose to ignore the negative sign there and ask a final set of closing remarks from both you, Elizabeth, and Danil, about your visions for the future. I think ethics education and building these ecosystems for ethical technologists is critical now. There's an urgent demand for it. But there also seems to be, I think that there needs to be more innovations in the space where we cannot just, put an ethics course at the end of, or ethics module at the end of a computer science course, or, start talking about the Greeks every time a technologist walks in and wants to learn about ethics. So what do you think are the kind of innovations that are needed in the future for enabling these ecosystems?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, and I loved, I loved what you said about the diversity of the folks in the room working on this. So diversity across many dimensions. So we think about gender, race, socioeconomic status, but also discipline, right? And so I guess my vision is a vision of work in technology and also education of all students, right? Kind of leadership development for all students that brings people together, builds bridges across disciplines, across backgrounds, and takes that, that view that is morally nuanced, that says, listen, this is an incredibly exciting moment in human history. There's a huge amount of innovation, and we have to pull together to ask those fundamental ethical questions. And I guess one other thing I would say is that, when we think about what will ensure, for example, that generative AI is used more for good than for ill, that is an incredibly complex question, right? You have to understand psychology, sociology, anthropology, as you were saying, law. Where is regulation appropriate? Where is it actually self-regulation or codes of conduct within industries? Where is it, like what will actually make a difference? What will lead to better consequences? So it's also recognizing that these are incredibly interesting, important, and complex questions about how we use these powerful human tools to build a better world, and to see that as an amazing educational challenge and opportunity.
And I love what you said about nuance. I almost feel like nuance is a radical act in this day and age, and I think we really need that here. Danil.
Agree with everything said already. I would just add, there is a great deal to be optimistic about. Like, Mark Andreessen is not wrong to be optimistic. There is optimism. The young people, all of you in the room, and all of those outside these rooms, have the energy, the talent, the skills to solve all the challenges we have. I don't think technology will solve all the challenges, but I think humans armed responsibly with technology will. So investing in the young generation, training them in a new interdisciplinary way to use technology responsibly is how we get out of pandemics and climate change and the endless wars we're locked into. That's the hope for the future. So there is reason to be optimistic, but we need to invest in the young people to do it.
Thank you so much. This has been such a terrific conversation. Can we please thank our panelists?